December 11th, 1941. Dawn off the coast of Wake Island, Central Pacific. The sea is calm, almost glassy. A pale sun climbs over the horizon, glinting off the waves. Japanese destroyer Hayate steams confidently toward the tiny atoll, guns elevated, flags snapping in the breeze. On the bridge, Commander Masao Minowa scans the distant shore through binoculars. Wake is a speck, 3 small islands barely defended. Intelligence says only a handful of Marines, a few old coastal guns. Easy prey. Behind Hayate, the invasion force stretches across the water. Cruisers, more destroyers, transports packed with Special Naval Landing Force troops. Admiral Kajioka Sadamichi, aboard light cruiser Yubari, has promised Tokyo a swift victory. Take Wake before Christmas. Show the world Japan's unstoppable might. They've seen American torpedoes before, in the Philippines, off Hawaii. Submarines lurking, firing their Mark 14s and nothing, duds. Premature explosions, harmless runs under the keel. Japanese officers laugh about it in their wardrooms. The Americans can't even make a torpedo explode, they joke. How will they fight a war? Now, as Hayate closes to 4,000 yards, the first American shells whistle overhead. Old 5-inch guns from Battery L on Peel Island. Splashes bracket the destroyer. Minowa orders return fire. Then, something unseen beneath the surface. A U.S. submarine, Tambor, commanded by Lieutenant Commander John Murphy, has been shadowing the force since midnight. Murphy fires 4 Mark 14 torpedoes at the heavy cruiser escort. The tracks are visible, thin white wakes streaking toward the Japanese line. On Yubari's bridge, Kajioka watches them come. He smiles thinly, another American failure. The torpedoes pass under the cruiser's keel, no explosion. Laughter ripples across the bridge. But out on Wake, 449 U.S. Marines under Major James Devereux aren't laughing. They're loading shells, sighting guns, waiting for the invaders to come into range. And deep below, the real reversal is already beginning, one that will turn Japanese mockery into dread and shift the Pacific War in ways no admiral yet imagines. The laughter on Yubari's bridge dies abruptly. A massive waterspout erupts alongside Hayate, then another, and another. Not from the shore batteries. From below, the old destroyer shudders violently. Her bow lifts clear of the water as internal explosions rip her apart. In seconds, Hayate rolls over and sinks, taking 168 men with her, the first Japanese surface warship lost to enemy action in the war. On Yubari, Kajioka's smile vanishes. Officers stare in stunned silence. Those were American torpedoes. They exploded. On Wake, Major Devereux watches through binoculars from the command post on Wake proper. His Marines cheer as the destroyer disappears. But the fight is just beginning. Kajioka, shaken but determined, orders the force to withdraw temporarily and regroup. He signals Tokyo, heavier bombardment needed. Back in Hawaii, Admiral Husband E. Kimmel receives frantic reports from Wake's radio operator, civilian contractor Dan Teeters. Enemy on island, issue unresolved. The Marines hold. That night, Japanese bombers pound the atoll. Fires rage. But the defenders dig in deeper. December 22nd. The second invasion comes, this time with 1,000 troops, heavier ships, carrier air support from Soryu and Hiryu. Kajioka believes overwhelming force will crush the tiny garrison. Landing craft churn toward the beach under covering fire. On the shore, Captain Wesley Platt's Marines wait in coral trenches. Beside them, the precious few Wildcat fighters, only 4 left, roar into the sky piloted by Captain Henry Elrod and his men. Elrod dives on the invasion fleet, strafing landing craft. Below, 5-inch guns from batteries A and B open up. Shells straddle the destroyers. One hits patrol boat number 32 Square, amidships. She explodes and sinks. Another hits number 33. She beaches in flames. Then the torpedoes again. U.S. submarines have been lurking. Now fixed or lucky, their Mark 14s run hot and true. But the real shock comes when Kajioka's flagship Yubari takes a direct hit from shore batteries and is forced to withdraw, damaged. The landing falters. Troops hit the beach but are pinned down by murderous marine fire. By nightfall, Kajioka calls off the assault again. 2 destroyers sunk, hundreds dead. Wake still holds. In Tokyo, the Imperial Navy staff reels, a tiny outpost defying the Emperor's fleet. They mock American torpedoes no more. But the deepest humiliation, and the true turning point, is still one desperate morning away, when the defenders of Wake will write a legend in blood and fire that echoes across the Pacific. December 23, 1941, 2:45 a.m., Wake Island. The night is pitch black, broken only by star shells bursting overhead and the red glow of burning wreckage on the reef. Japanese landing craft grind onto the beaches south of Wake proper. This time, no hesitation. Over 1,000 troops pour ashore. Special naval landing forces, battle-hardened, bayonets fixed. Major James Devereux's command post is a sandbag dugout near the airfield. Radio crackles with reports from every sector. South Beach, enemy landing in force. Wilkes Island, Japs on the shore. Peel holding, but they're coming. Devereux, calm voice cutting through static. Fight them on the beaches, no withdrawal. The Marines have almost no ammunition left. The 4 surviving Wildcats are out of fuel. The 5-inch guns have only a few rounds each. But they fight. On the South Shore, Captain Wesley Platt's platoon meets the first wave head-on. Machine guns chatter. Rifles crack. Japanese troops fall in heaps, but more come, screaming, "Banzai!" Hand-to-hand in the dark, bayonets, rifle butts, fists. Major Paul Putnam, commanding the Marine fighters, grabs a rifle and joins the line. Captain Henry, Hammer, and Hank Elrod, already credited with sinking a destroyer from the air, fights on the ground now, firing until his ammunition is gone. At dawn, the situation is hopeless. Japanese troops overrun positions one by one. Devereux moves from bunker to bunker, urging men to hold. By 10 a.m., the airfield falls. By noon, organized resistance ends on Wake and Peel Islands. On Wilkes, Lieutenant John McAllister's detachment fights to the last shell, then destroys their guns. At 1:30 p.m., Devereux sends his final message. The issue is no longer in doubt. He orders the colors struck. The defenders, 385 Marines and 68 Navy personnel still alive, surrender. Japanese losses, 2 destroyers sunk, 2 more damaged, over 700 killed, nearly 300 wounded. The first major check to Japan's advance. But the story of Wake is not just the heroic defense. It's what happened beneath the waves. U.S. submarines Tambor, Triton, and others had been firing the troubled Mark 14 torpedoes throughout the battle. Many still failed, but enough ran true. Enough exploded. And in Tokyo, the laughter stopped forever. Because those dud American torpedoes had just drawn first blood and proven they could kill. Yet the real reversal, the moment Japanese admirals realized the Pacific balance was shifting, comes months later, when the fixes finally take hold and the silent service begins its deadly harvest. Spring 1942, Pearl Harbor Submarine Base, Hawaii. The laughter from Japanese wardrooms has turned to uneasy silence. Reports flood Tokyo. American submarines are suddenly dangerous, ships vanishing without warning, convoys ravaged. What changed? Back in late 1941, the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ordnance finally admitted the Mark 14 torpedo was broken. 3 fatal flaws. First, it ran 10 feet deeper than set, passing harmlessly under targets. Second, the magnetic exploder detonated prematurely, or not at all. Third, the contact exploder crushed on impact, failing to fire. Submarine commanders like Mush Morton of USS Wahoo and Dudley Morton's predecessors screamed for tests. They were ignored, told to get better. But Wake Island changed everything. The torpedoes that sank Hayate and the patrol boats weren't perfect. Some still failed. But enough worked. Enough to prove the weapon could kill. Enough to force Buord to act. By mid-1942, under pressure from Admiral Lockwood in Pearl, the magnetic exploder is deactivated, depth settings corrected, contact pins strengthened. The Mark 14 finally runs hot, straight, and normal. And the Pacific becomes a graveyard for Japanese shipping. Submarines, like USS Silversides under Commander Creed Burlingame, begin racking up kills, tankers, transports, destroyers. One by one, the arteries of the Japanese Empire are severed. Oil from the East Indies stops flowing. Rice from Southeast Asia never reaches home islands. Troops on remote garrisons starve. In Tokyo, Admiral Matomi Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff, pores over loss reports. He remembers the mockery after Pearl Harbor, the dud torpedoes. Now, those same weapons are gutting the merchant fleet. By 1943, the silent service is sinking over 100,000 tons a month. By 1944, over 500,000. Japanese admirals no longer laugh. They fear the shadows beneath the waves, because what began as Japanese contempt at Wake Island has become the slow, inexorable strangling of their empire. And the man who will drive that point home deepest, a skipper named Dick O'Kane on USS Tang, is already at sea, hunting with the once mock torpedo, now turned deadly predator. But the full reversal, the moment Japan truly grasps the shift, comes in the dark waters off Guadalcanal and beyond, where American submarines begin to own the night. Mid-1943, the vast reaches of the Pacific, from the Solomons to the Marianas. Japanese convoys steam in desperate loops, hugging coasts, zigzagging through nights blacked out. But the shadows find them anyway. USS Tang, under Commander Richard O'Kane, one of the deadliest skippers of the war, glides through the East China Sea. O'Kane, a student of the early failures, trusts his now fixed Mark 14s completely. In one patrol alone, Tang sinks 10 ships. Torpedoes run true. Exploders bite on contact. Across the fleet, the score mounts. Japanese admirals gather in truck, then Rabaul faces drawn. Admiral Manechi Koga, Yamamoto's successor, reads the latest merchant loss tables. Over 5 million tons sunk since Pearl Harbor, half of it in the last year. Oil tankers gone. The fuel that powers the fleet dwindles to drops. Troops on New Guinea, Guadalcanal, the Gilberts, cut off, starving, dying. The mockery of 1941 feels like another lifetime. Back then, American submarines were nuisances, torpedoes that fizzled. Wake Island was the first crack in that certainty. Hayate's sudden, violent end. The failed invasions. The blood price paid for a tiny atoll. It forced the fixes. It bought time for the silent service to mature. And now, that early contempt has become Japan's nightmare. Convoys cannot sail without destroyer escorts stretched thin. Escorts cannot protect against wolves that strike and vanish. The Empire's lifelines sever one by one. In Tokyo, the Naval General Staff issues desperate orders. More anti-submarine patrols, deeper convoys, acoustic decoys. Nothing works. By late 1944, Japan's merchant fleet is a ghost. Industry grinds to a halt. The combined fleet, once invincible, sits rusting at anchor for lack of fuel. And in the quiet moments aboard surviving flagships, old admirals remember Wake Island. They remember laughing at American duds. They remember the morning a single destroyer vanished in a fireball. That was the beginning of the end. Not Midway's carriers, not Guadalcanal's jungles, but a tiny coral atoll and a torpedo that finally exploded when it was supposed to. Because from that moment of reversal, the Pacific belonged to the hunters beneath the waves. And the Japanese Navy, once masters of the sea, learned the hardest way possible. Never laugh at an enemy's weapon. Until you're sure it can't kill you.